The greatest athletic feat in the United States is to hit a home run. It's a wonderful moment where the ball goes off the playing field, you know, and everything kind of stops and the guy gets to celebrate. And that really didn't exist before Babe Ruth. He kind of invented the home run.
Nobody in the history of American sport has made the same impact that Babe Ruth made on the world of baseball. The inventor of the home run. A powerhouse who built the reputation of an entire club. A larger-than-life figure who revolutionized his sport.
He was a phenomenon. He blew it apart. He blasted the baseball apart because there was no such thing as a home run.
He so towered above everyone. There was no one, in terms of sheer statistics and power, that in his era who came even close to him.
He was the first major media star in American life. He really transcended baseball.
Babe Ruth is considered the greatest ball player who ever lived. I mean, there was nobody who played the game better than he did.
At the turn of the 20th century, the United States of America was a land of opportunity. But as a new frontier without history, it was also quick to embrace modernity and celebrity. America needed real heroes. It needed men like Babe Ruth.
America's a relatively young country, and we don't have like those folk stories. Like, we don't have leprechauns here, and we don't have spirits, and we don't have King Arthur and the Round Table. We don't have any of that stuff. And we have tended to take real life people and make them our folk heroes and our folk stories. And Babe Ruth for sure is one of them. He's the biggest sports name in the history of the United States.
His personality and his charisma were probably even better than his baseball playing ability. He had a face that could easily be related to. He had an everyman sort of quality about him. He was not at all removed from regular life, and in fact he had humble origins which were a popular part of his success story.
Those humble beginnings in baseball can be traced to Baltimore, an underprivileged port city on the East Coast, where George Herman Ruth was born in 1895.
As a kid, he had it tough. He did have it tough as a kid.
His father owned a bar, and his mother seemed to have some mental issues, and his mother died young, and his father died young, too, in a barroom fight.
He was constantly getting into scrapes in this rather poor town.
He was ADHD. I mean, they tried everything. They used to wallop the heck out of him, and nothing would fix, so they put him in St. Mary's. Which
was almost like an orphanage or reform school or both.
There was a lot of discipline, and it was tough living, but it was like a baseball academy.
So they put a bat in his hand, and that was the end of the story. He was out there morning, you know, rain, shine, afternoon. He had a bat in his hand, and by the time he left St. Mary's, he could play every position perfectly.
He was playing, as a kid, 12 and 13 years old, he was playing over 200 baseball games a year, which was phenomenal.
He was hitting 500-foot home runs in St. Mary's as a kid. He was a phenomenon.
His talents caught the eye of local club the Baltimore Orioles in 1914. It was there he earned his nickname, Babe. But just 5 months later, Major League giants the Boston Red Sox came calling, and it wasn't his hitting that interested them.
He was a really athletic guy. He was about 6'2", which was kind of large at the time, and he could throw the heck out of a baseball.
The thing not to lose sight of is that he was a tremendous pitcher. He might have been a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame had he never picked up a bat and become an outfielder in his life.
He could play every position, so then they needed his bat, and they made him play every day in Boston. When he wasn't pitching, he was in the outfield. When he was in the outfield, he was pitching. He was one tired boy.
He was hitting the ball out of the park. So people started realizing, wait a minute, this guy is such a tremendous hitter, maybe he just should play the outfield.
His ability led the Red Sox to 3 World Series wins in 1915, 1916, and 1918. But his impact stretched beyond winning pennants. Baseball had been a low-scoring speed-based game. Ruth was ushering in the so-called live ball era.
While the sport of baseball had been the national pastime since the middle of the 19th century, he changed the game with the way that he hit the baseball, changed it into a much more high-scoring offensive game, and this affected the game's popularity dramatically.
They taught you to swing down at the ball and to hit it into the ground and hit it hard and hit it into the outfield and you'd get to first base. And hitting it up in the air meant that you were going to hit it to an outfielder and that would be an out. And he came along with a different swing that he had perfected to swing upwards. And he swung upwards, but he hit fly balls, but he hit them so far that nobody could catch him.
The home run, there was no such thing as a home run or as many. When he was getting his first home runs, one team collectively for the year had 11. That's something to think about. He had 20, and collectively for a year, one team had together 11. So does that tell you the impact that the home run had?
His form meant there was a growing list of admirers. The recently formed New York Yankees headed the queue, and Red Sox owner Harry Frazee was willing to talk business.
He was the star of the Boston Red Sox until Harry Frazee decided that he needed money more than he needed Babe Ruth. I mean, part of that was that Babe was kind of a pain in the neck. He was not your meek guy. He was often, into one sort of small trouble or another. He was always hitting Harry up for a little bit more money. He was something of a pain in the neck, and so part of it was that Harry decided that the huge sum of money he would get from the Yankees would help. Also, it would be nice to get Babe out of his hair.
Ruth joined the Yankees in 1919, and moving to New York would make him a star. But the Yankees needed the Babe as much as he needed them. Until his arrival, they weren't even the best team in New York.
When Babe Ruth was sold by the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees had never won a championship. And almost immediately, they were in the World Series, and they won one within a couple of years of the Babe being there.
If you do it in New York, it takes on a lot more import. New York was the place for him to be.
It was the combination of being a fabulous athlete and New York being the media capital of the country.
People ask me, what if he didn't go from Boston? What if he went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin? I'm going to tell you here and now, I thoroughly believe it in my soul. My mother believed it in her soul. You would have heard from Babe from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, because he was that kind of guy. The team didn't define him. He defined the team.
In fact, his home runs were saving baseball. In 1920, it was revealed that Chicago White Sox players had taken money to throw the 1919 World Series. It was known as the Black Sox scandal. With the fans disillusioned, baseball needed a hero.
The game needed a savior. After the Black Sox scandal, Babe Ruth came along, and the combination of his incredible hitting ability and his magnetic personality and charisma just would have been enough to overcome any kind of a scandal. He was just a superstar. Before we used that word, that's what he was.
He underlined that star status in 1920. Ruth hit an astonishing 54 home runs.
There are people who have broken his career home run record, but no one has ever dominated the hitting game the way Babe Ruth did. In 1920, Babe Ruth, as an individual, out-hit 14 of the 16 teams in the major leagues with home runs.
The man hit a lot of home runs. He hit 40 home runs, I think, 10 or 11 seasons. I mean, the man was a powerhouse.
The balls he hit were so soft, they'd actually wrap around the bat when you hit them. And he was hitting 400 and 500-foot home runs. Can you imagine the power behind that? Look at the power in those hips. See, that's where the power comes from. See how his legs, his hips totally turned. That's why I said when I'd swing big and I'd miss big, well, he totally wrapped himself right around. When he came around with that bat, he actually had a callus on this arm, because he'd go all the way around and it would take his body all the way around. And in 1916 and 1918, he was also swinging a 54-ounce bat, which is a tree. I think the biggest one now is 36, I think. I mean, it's not big at all. And he was a 54-ounce bat. That's how he did it.
There's no team in any American sport more recognizable than the Yankees. No baseball team have won the World Series more times. But without Babe Ruth, none of that would have been possible. He made the New York Yankees the franchise they are today.
The early years was that he made them into a winner. Starting in 1922 was their first pennant. 1922, 1923, 1926, 1927, 1928, 1932. Not only that, but those were 7 pennants with the Yankees. He was with 3 pennant winners with the Red Sox. A total of 10 World Series years. Amazing, amazing record.
Now a full-time right fielder, Ruth had made the game exciting, high-scoring and power-based. In 1923, the Yankees built a new stadium to accommodate all those fans who wanted a glimpse of the Babe.
You know, if you look at any culture and you say, one of the biggest buildings that have been built by that culture, you know, they haven't been cathedrals and stuff. They've been all these arenas and ballparks and things like that. And if you say, who's the patron saint of it all, it's Babe Ruth. Yankee Stadium, you know, way back then was built mainly because of him.
I don't think there's ever been an athlete in any sport who has been so revolutionary in the sense of attracting so many people.
Ruth had drawing power. Ruth was a star.
Yankee Stadium was always referred to as the house that Ruth built. They built it because the stadium they were playing in, a borrowed or rented stadium that the New York Giants played in, was just not large enough to hold all the fans that Babe Ruth was bringing along. So they built the stadium in 1923. Babe Ruth hits the first home run in the stadium. The Yankees win the World Series that year against the Giants. That's the point where he takes over the baseball world completely.
Babe Ruth had become King of New York. He was America's first ever real sporting celebrity.
He was just, at that time, the biggest star in American life, and really the template for the American culture of celebrity. He is quite likely the most photographed individual in American history. Marilyn Monroe, perhaps, or Elvis Presley, but at least as big as those people, if not bigger, in American culture.
But here was an accessible star, generous, humorous and down to earth, and this everyman personality allowed Americans to identify with the Babe.
He looked like someone you could chat with on the street corner, and in fact you could. He never lost that common touch, even at the heights of his fame. And one day he'd be speaking to the President of the United States, rather informally, I might add. In fact, one day he looked at the President and he said, "Hot as hell, ain't it, Prez?" And the next day he'd be talking to you or me on the street corner, and just the same demeanor. What you saw was what you got.
Talking to the fans, being around the fans was second nature to him. It wasn't a pressure. It was never a pressure. With his fans, when he was doing something, he didn't do it exclusively. He'd say, "Hey, come on, I'm going on a ride, come with me." And he'd bring you with him, that's why. He's beloved. He wasn't exclusive, he was always inclusive.
As Ruth became a household name, the US was experiencing a time of economic boom, and the world's biggest baseball star would personify the Roaring '20s.
He hit his stride as a baseball player in 1919, just as the Roaring '20s or the Jazz Age were taking off, and he was made for that.
He just had this huge, huge personality. He had an appetite for life.
He ate large, he drank large, he womanized large. He did everything large.
You know, all the men wanted to be him, all the women wanted to sleep with him. Yeah, the funny thing about Ruth is that the real person and the myth has sort of coincided. That was Babe Ruth.
Well, they didn't call it the Roaring '20s for nothing, and Babe was sat himself right in the middle of it. Yeah, it was, flappers, and he did have girls galore. Babe was accepted in every speakeasy in New York. He knew all the kingpins and the not-so-kingpins, and he didn't discriminate. Babe knew everybody. Everybody wanted to know Babe. You know, if Babe came over and said, "How you doing, kid?" You made it. That's all he had to say. "How you doing, kid?" And it was like everybody would walk on water. My mother said it was amazing.
But the fast living off the pitch was affecting Ruth's game. Overweight and blighted by injury, in 1925 he suffered his worst season with just 25 home runs from 98 games.
He looked like he'd really let himself go, and that his bad living was going to get to him. And he spotted that, and he went out and got a personal trainer. Another first thing.
Babe vowed that he would change, and change he did. He never did that again. He never did. He never thought of himself bigger than the game or bigger than his fans.
The vigorous training regime paid off. 47 home runs followed in 1926, and the Yankees were back in a World Series final. It was his love of baseball that maintained his position at the top.
Most people think that he just played for the Yankees and then was a degenerate the rest of the time, but he wasn't a degenerate the rest of the time. As soon as the season ended, he was off on these barnstorming tours. Babe Ruth probably played baseball against a larger percent of the population than any baseball player who's come since.
By 1927, the Babe was at his best. He slugged the Yankees towards another World Series crown with 60 home runs, a season record that would last for 34 years.
I think his peak was probably 1927, the year that he hit 60 homers. The 1927 Yankees are considered by many historians to be the best baseball team of all time.
The Yankees won another World Series in 1928, but within a year, America and the rest of the world entered a period of economic crisis. Even in those times of depression, though, Ruth remained an inspirational figure. Despite being the game's biggest earner, few begrudged him that status. He was still Babe Ruth, man of the people.
When he earned $80,000, which was a record amount, someone said to him, "Babe, you know, you're earning more money than President Hoover." And he said, "Well, I had a better year than him." I mean, that was so typical of Babe Ruth's humor.
What's important to know about him in that era is that he was a tremendous symbol of hope for Americans, in part because he continued to do things that nobody had ever done on a baseball field before, and in part because he made a lot of money during that time when a lot of people weren't making a lot of money. So he was sort of a symbol of normalcy, the idea that we would hope to return to economic boom times. And you know, if Babe Ruth was still all right, maybe we would all still be all right during the Great Depression.
Although now in the twilight of his career, Ruth enjoyed one final triumph in the 1932 World Series against the Chicago Cubs. In Game 3, after 2 strikes, Ruth allegedly pointed to where he was going to hit the next pitch. He smashed the ball out of the ground. It became known as the called shot. The Yankees went on to win, but the debate about that home run still rages.
Did he point? Yes, he pointed, because he did it many, many times. He'd say, "Hey, Jack, what side of the scoreboard did so-and-so hit it?" "Oh, you hit it to the right, babe. Okay, I'm going to hit it to the left." And he'd go out and hit it to the left. You know, he knew the ball. He knew what he could do with it.
It's a Ruthian thing to do, to predict that you're going to hit a home run and to do it on the very next pitch. And it doesn't matter really whether he did it or not. What matters is we either think he did it or we want to believe that he did it.
That home run would be his final hit in a World Series. As the Depression worsened, so did Ruth's form. In February 1935, he was sold to the Boston Braves, and his 15-year love affair with New York and the Yankees had come to an end.
His career does sort of track with American history. Of course, he has, you know, some very, very great success prior to the stock market crash in 1929, and then as the Depression worsens and deepens in the early 30s, 1932, 1933, Babe is starting to see the beginning of the end as a player.
I mean, he had a fabulous year in 1932, and yet he was pretty much out of baseball in 1935.
Fittingly, Ruth departed with 3 home runs in one of his final games for the Braves. Numbers 712, 713 and 714. Just a week later, in May 1935, he announced his retirement, longing of a return to his beloved Yankees as their manager.
And for whatever reason, Jacob Ruppert, the owner of the Yankees, didn't see the managerial stuff in Babe Ruth and didn't want to try to move him into that sort of a position.
He didn't want a petulant child to be the manager of the Yankees. And so I think the personal relationship between the two of them probably is what stopped any chances he had.
His real dream was to manage the Yankees, and he probably would have done a decent job. You know, he would have matured. He wouldn't have been a 25-year-old anymore. He'd have been, 45 or 50. But the answer was, Babe, my boy, you can't manage yourself. Why would you think that we would hire you to manage our ball players? It made him bitter, after doing such great things for the Yankees and making Colonel Ruppert so much money. Here he's being shunted aside. It made him rather bitter.
He was devastated. My mother said he never got over it. He used to sit by the radio and call the plays before they happened. She said he was so despondent and depressed. Baseball's his life's blood. And here baseball was saying, sorry, we don't want you, babe.
Ruth struggled without baseball in his life. The game was all he'd known. But his star failed to fade. Despite no longer taking an active role in the game, he was idolized wherever he went.
The thing that happens with athletes is that you have two deaths. You have the death of your career, and then you have your own death. What do you do if you've been Babe Ruth? Where do you go? How do you recreate that excitement that you had when every day you went and 60,000 people cheered you and called your name?
Just a decade after retiring, he became stricken with cancer and a shadow of the figure he once was. But even then, Babe Ruth was still giving all of himself to the American people, right until the very end.
There's been so many lovely things said about me, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to thank everybody. Thank you. Give him away, Dad.
Like 20 minutes before he died, he signed an autograph for a male nurse. He said, you better get it now because you're not going to get it if you don't get it now.
The poignancy is there. I mean, getting sick and approaching death far too early, and yet still being Babe Ruth, being this incredible media personality and real personality in American culture. Even then, he still had it when he walked onto that field. It's just it gives you goosebumps to think about it.
On August the 16th, 1948, Babe Ruth died, aged just 53. America mourned its greatest sporting hero.
People were very, very distraught. People loved him. I don't know of anyone who didn't love Babe Ruth. It was just, if you liked baseball, he was the icon. And then when he died, there were thousands of people showed up to honor him. I can't think of any person other than perhaps some beloved president or something who had that kind of following.
Ruth's legacy can be seen across America today, more than a century after he picked up a baseball bat in Baltimore. His record of 714 career home runs stood for nearly 40 years. He led the league in home runs scored 11 times, and in runs scored 8 times. A pioneer, a record breaker, and an all-American hero. Babe Ruth lives on.
And still today, when young kids come into the Baseball Hall of Fame, one of their first questions is, where's the Babe Ruth stuff? He hasn't played a Major League Baseball game since 1935, and kids are walking in today wanting to know about him. So he's as big as it gets in baseball, and for a long time was as big as it could get in America.
Certainly the rest of the people from his generation have pretty well been forgotten. I don't hear anybody talking about Honus Wagner very much or Ty Cobb very much. I think Babe Ruth will always be with us.
It's probably oral tradition more than anything. Fathers tell their sons, and then sons grow up and tell their sons. It is kind of an amazing thing. You can go in taverns in the United States, and there'll be pictures of Babe Ruth as often as there'll be pictures of any of today's athletes, I think. He just struck a chord in people, in that the way he lived and the way he looked. He just set the benchmark for success in athletics, I think, in the United States.